we have a guy that never took his work back home east, and that's a guy, Todd Helton, who stayed with the Colorado Rockies, and we'll get into the reasons why maybe he didn't make the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. But how time flies! I can remember being outside of his room, and there was a party, and it was going on, and it was so intense at the time that you couldn't get in. But I was standing right outside the room when he got the call on spring break that he was drafted by. Who originally drafted him out of high school? Padres?
I'm gonna Wikipedia that now.
Yeah, but so I mean, he and I were never buddies or anything, but just everybody from North Knoxville was kind of partying in the same place, and I wasn't good enough like him and Bubba Trammell to get into that NSKIP group. If you're familiar with Knoxville, there was a crew of people that would, it was before traveling teams, but everybody would go from, be it Levi Field or wherever, and play at NSKIP. And there were like three at the same time in the same year in the same class. There were three guys that would go on to the major leagues. Bubba Trammell was one, Todd Helton was the other. I can't remember the third. But let's start with this. And not to belabor this point, but frankly, the steroid era has ruined who is selected into the Hall of Fame for me, be it Todd Helton, yay or nay, be it whoever, yay or nay. It used to be a big deal, but now we have this big gap, and the discussion just kind of turns into, should those guys be let in? And it's not the discussion about the players that get in or don't. So to be honest with you, that slipped by yesterday, and I didn't see it until you brought it up, and I saw it on your Twitter feed. You have some pretty strong comments about why Todd Helton should be in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So tell me why, and then I think with some relationships, I can provide a little bit of insight as to maybe his thinking about not getting inducted or personal individual honors. So take off, Caleb.
So Todd Helton has a 953 OPS, which is to me the most important hitting stat there is. It's on base plus slugging percentage. And that's the 23rd best OPS in baseball history. The top 100 career OPS players who had at least 9,000 at bats are eligible for the Hall of Fame. So like not one's playing, obviously, and didn't have ties to steroids, have all gotten into the Hall of Fame except Todd Helton. It's not like he's like 99 or 100. He's number 23, the 23rd best career OPS. That includes former players, players playing right now, and players tied to steroids. Okay. And that is ridiculous that he's not into the Hall of Fame. I think that him playing at Coors Field, I think, is being used against him. I think we know that there's a lot of pop flies that turn into home runs when you play in Denver. Fair enough. But Larry Walker's in the Hall of Fame, and he had his best years in Coors Field. So,
and when I look at the two, I think that Todd Helton is a significantly better player. And I don't know the number. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. When I think of the two, I think Todd is significantly better.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is Walker had a better couple of years, but overall, Todd Helton was significantly better. The funny thing about Todd Helton is usually high OPSs are for power hitters because analytics and sabermetrics have shown that power outweighs hitting for average. A Derek Jeter is never going to have a high OPS or a guy that plays for base hits. Todd Helton was a guy who played for base hits, and he still had a ridiculously high OPS because he constantly got on base.
Beautiful, efficient, compact swing. I thought he was fantastic. I do think flat beer field helped some. I do think that playing in that atmosphere helped some. I mean, if I want to drink a beer, it's going to be a good beer. I'm just going to tell you, it ain't going to be Coors. But anyway, here is a little bit of insight that I think I can provide. I think to a large extent, the individual awards, which it would include the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, those decisions to not place a significant importance on those was made years and years and years ago. So I knew Todd Helton's dad really well. We worked out at the same facility in Knoxville. And you talk about, winning the gene pool. Here was a guy, God rest his soul, that I think I saw him bench press maybe 5 times, but every time it was 225 for 10 reps. I mean, most people have to work to get to that point. It was just God-given ability. And that was obviously passed on to Todd. But the one thing I remember talking to Jerry Helton about, and he brought it up, I didn't bring it up, is when his contract was up, it's like he needs to make a push to get to the Yankees, or at least a team on the East Coast that gets more pub, because that's going to help him get more awards and those sorts of things. And at the time, I just kind of thought, yeah, playing for the Yankees was cool. But I do think that at that point in his career, what years did he play again, Caleb?
It's like 97 to 2013, I think. So 17 years.
So this would have been about in the mid 2000s. He was up for a contract, and he could have chose to go to the Yankees. Were slightly in play. Everybody was in play. Todd Helton was one of the players at his peak that could go anywhere he wanted to and get a contract, unless they just had a first baseman that was very similar and in place. So that decision was made at the time by Todd not to go and pursue other opportunities, because he was comfortable in Colorado. He has like a 400 acre, 4,000 acre, whatever it is, plot of land out there. So while I agree with everything you said, and I think Major League Baseball is still largely ruled when it comes to personal awards by Eastern voters, kind of like they said the AP was in college football years ago. I don't know that it bothers Todd Helton all that much, because of he was able to make a home in Colorado. Now he lives in Knoxville now, but I'm sure he still has that huge, monstrous plot of land that makes you think of Yellowstone. So I would think he would eventually get in. You would know better than I, Caleb. But I think he made that decision that personal awards weren't his thing, weren't his bag, probably 15 years ago. And I think you saw that yesterday when the selection was announced.
I could see that. I think we know that Todd Helton is the ultimate unselfish player. I've heard stories, and we all know, 1994, Peyton Manning and Brandon Stewart commit, and apparently the plan was to start Jerry Colquitt that year, and Manning and Stewart redshirt, and that Todd Helton be there only to help develop Manning and Stewart. And he was he of course became thrust into the starting role for 3 games because Colquitt got hurt. But Helton was there. He was playing as a backup quarterback on a football team to help younger quarterbacks come along. It was the ultimate unselfish type of move by him, because he wasn't focusing on going to the NFL. He knew that baseball was his move, and he was going to play and he was playing baseball for Tennessee at the time. And it's hard to not have a ton of respect for a guy that would do something like that, honestly.
Yeah, I know. I'm completely fine with it. And I think he's probably fine with it. Now, it's a little bit, is it different now in Major League Baseball, much like the NBA? Because used to be the NBA, you basically got, a 5-year opportunity to get in. And then if you didn't get in, you had to be in this Veterans Committee. I mean, what are his chances of getting in next year in the future?
Yeah, so I think that there's I can't remember if it's like you're on the ballot for 5, 7, or 10 years. But the way baseball works is there are people on the ballot, and the voters can select 10 people. And whoever receives 75% of the votes gets in. But the voters can select up to 10 people. Only Scott Rolen got in yesterday. By the way, absolute joke. Scott Rolen is nowhere near Todd Helton's level. He's nowhere near Andrew Jones's level. I mean, it was just an embarrassment that he got in. But so there is a limitation. Here's the problem with what's happening, and you brought up the steroid era. There is a lack of consistency among the different voters. Voters disagree. That's healthy. That's fine. They disagree. Half the voters, maybe less than half, think that it shouldn't matter. Just throw it all out. It shouldn't matter. Just look at the numbers, and if they're in, they're in, because it was part of an era. The other half are like, no steroid user should be involved in the Hall of Fame. Well, what you have is these players who have ties to steroids. Yesterday, you had A-Rod, Manny Ramirez, Gary Sheffield, all steroid ties, all on the ballot. Well, voters are using their votes, some of them, on these steroid users who aren't getting in the Hall of Fame because they're not getting enough votes to get into the Hall of Fame. So they're staying on the ballot, which is taking votes away from other players who would be like Todd Helton. This happened to Fred McGriff, who, by the way, got in. I think there was like some players' veterans committee that put him in back in December.
Yeah, I think it was like on his last leg or something to get in.
Yeah, absolute travesty that he wasn't in on the first ballot. 2490 hits, 493 home runs. You know, before the steroid era, 400 home runs got you in the Hall of Fame. There wasn't even a thought. And then they upped it to, no, it's got to be 500 home runs because of how many people hit the 500 home run club during the steroid era. Well, Fred McGriff wasn't doing steroids and he hit 493 home runs. How are you going to say he doesn't belong? Well, he wasn't getting in because he was on the ballot with so many other steroid users. And there was a select group of voters that was saying, I'm going to vote for these steroid users because I don't think it should be a detriment to getting into the Hall. That's fine. I don't mind if you think that it shouldn't matter, fine. The problem is there was a contingent that didn't believe that. So those players kept staying on the ballot every single year, and it was taking votes away from other players who would have gotten into the Hall because nobody could agree on if those steroid users had gotten into the Hall of Fame on the first try, or if they were just not eligible for the ballot, that would have been better than what's happening, which is they're staying on the ballot every year. Yep. And that's causing problems.